I think if I contrast the essays that I do at the beginning of a paper, say in week 1 versus in week 8, even when I go back to sort of revise the content at the end of the year, I can see there's a bit of a difference. And it definitely, I think the main thing is it gives you confidence. You're doing so much history that you sort of, and because you don't really have the time to sort of second guess yourself sometimes. And because supervisions are this environment where there's no judgment, there's no right or wrong answer. They just want to hear, and they genuinely are interested in how you approach the content, how you're thinking about history. It becomes this kind of thing that, it does get more easy with time, I think, and you become more confident in your ability to do it.
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We're here with a new guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Josh. I'm a third year history student at Trinity Hall.
Nice. So we're here to talk about studying history at Cambridge. Going to talk about what it's like, life outside of studying as well, and talk about the course and how it's different maybe to other courses as well. So what does a typical day look like for a history student?
I suppose it depends on the year and it depends on the point in term. Taking like an average day, say in first or second year, you might have a lecture in the morning, a seminar maybe, or a supervision, and then it is just reading for your weekly essay after that. You get into quite a good routine with it. It's something that I found useful to have. It was like, Wednesday is my sort of lecture and reading afternoon, so I'll go to this library. Third year is where it tends to get a bit more sort of a bit less structured, which it works for some people, doesn't work for others, but it tends to be a lecture and maybe some reading, writing in the library afterwards.
Nice. So for like how many, like for anyone who doesn't know, like how per week, how many essays or lectures or supervisions would you be writing or doing?
So it's typically, you will have maybe 2 lectures per paper. In total, maybe that's about 4, maybe 5 lectures. So compared to other subjects, not a lot. There's less of an emphasis on that with history, I think. And then you have 2 supervisions a week on average, with usually 1 essay going into one of those supervisions. In the first year, your 2 papers that you're doing, you alternate weekly. So you'll still have your weekly supervisions, but every other week will be your essay for each paper. And then that means that you have sort of a set focus with the supervision work essay-wise. You might have a couple other things to do for your other supervision that's maybe less involved. It's sort of it's like a complicated thing to kind of break down, but it tends to be that sort of you'll have 1 priority supervision, at least in first year anyway. Then second year, it's the same, an essay a week on average, I'd say.
Interesting. So just to kind of put some examples to that, say if you had 2 weeks and you had 2 supervisions in the first week and 2 supervisions in the second week, what are those supervisions going to be, and how, because you said how they change every other week, so how does that look like?
So to use first year as an example, you do 2 outline papers, and each week you'll have a supervision for both of those, but you'll only be doing an essay for 1. So you'll have your first outline paper in week 1, and then an essay for your second outline paper in week 2, and then that pattern repeats throughout term. So it sort of alternates between them, but it does mean that every week you'll be having a supervision on both. Just one will be maybe less involved than the other.
So does that mean you'd only be writing 1 piece of work to hand in per week rather than 2? I see.
First, history and politics and history and modern languages, that tends to be a bit more complicated. But for pure history, it tends to be just one essay a week.
So one essay a week. Okay. Yeah, 2 essays a week does sound quite.
I'm glad I've not had to deal with that. So
and what does like what does one essay a week look like? Like how much work goes into that? What like and how many say if you have to hand in an essay Friday morning, when would you be starting on that essay, and what does the process look like up until handing?
Yeah, I suppose that depends a lot on the person and a lot on the supervisor. So for me, I got into quite a good routine of having maybe 3 days of reading,
Yeah.
a full day of writing, and
Okay.
then half a day of kind of tweaking the essay. And then that would mean I'd have the supervision the next day, could have a day to focus on other things, and then the process would repeat. For other people, they might do less reading and more writing.
Yeah.
Other people might not do any reading and focus on the writing, or vice versa. It really does depend on the person, but I think the faculty and individual supervisors will want it to be that you have a good sort of reading base to go off, and then to build on from for writing an essay.
Yeah. I guess it goes without saying that the less reading you do, the less you have to write about. Or
Completely, yeah. And I think it's in first year especially, I know a few people that were basing their essays on the lectures, so they maybe felt they could get away with not doing as much reading. But it is the kind of thing that as you settle into Cambridge a bit and you settle into the routine of term, it is like, okay, I should be doing some reading for my essays. And the better essays that I've done are the ones I think that have had more reading and more work gone into them.
Nice. So 3 days of reading sounds like quite a bit of work. So am I right in thinking that even though in history there might be less lectures in compared to some of the sciences subjects, there's a bigger emphasis on independent reading?
Completely, yeah. I've got a few friends that do STEM, and it's something that we always talk about because their course is a lot more structured. So they have labs, they have more lectures, they have multiple in a day. We don't have many things like that. We don't have many contact hours, but we do have a lot of independent time. That works for some people. So it works perfect for me because I like setting my own deadlines. I can be quite flexible then. I can do a bit of work in the evening if I need to, if the morning's not free. Other people might like the structure, but then I would say you can create that structure yourself, and you can be quite flexible with how you do that.
So how have you found having a lot of free time and planning your schedule? Has that changed much from first year to in your third year now? And
yeah, I think so. I think I've been more comfortable with how I approach an essay. It's the kind of thing that you do so many of them that you're going to change how you approach them. But I think, say, comparing the end of second year to the beginning of first year, I knew more how to approach a reading list, how to break down a very long set of readings on say, the course webpage, and working out what's useful for me, what maybe I can skim through, how to break down the content within an individual reading. And then that in turn means you approach writing slightly differently. You get more comfortable, I think, is the main thing. And I think because it's such a new environment at the beginning of first year, it's a really daunting thing to get used to. But that comfort does come. And I think the good thing about Cambridge, even though it might not seem like it at the time, is that you're doing so much work and it's so regular that you're sort of forced to become comfortable. It becomes second nature in a way. Whereas at the start, it's like, how do I even begin with all of this?
I guess there's always the next essay that's around the corner.
Exactly. You don't really have the time to overthink it, to be honest.
Nice. That's cool. So next question that we had is, when people are thinking about universities and they're thinking about Cambridge, strangely in the system you can't apply to both Oxford and Cambridge. You have to choose if you're wanting to apply to one of them. I was wondering, were you ever thinking about Oxford, and what made you apply to Cambridge?
Yeah, so for me, Cambridge was my choice because I'd been there. It was a couple of years ago. I'd just been on like a family holiday down here.
Nice.
So it always felt like I would choose here because I was already slightly familiar. It was really the city that was the draw. And I think if I'd been to Oxford before, that might have been my choice potentially. so yeah, the big thing going into applying here, and it was the case with the other unis that I put down as well, was the city itself. I'm not too familiar with the Oxford history course to know how it differs. I can't imagine it would be too different.
I'm not sure.
But I would encourage people who say haven't been to both places to see. Colleges is another big thing that goes into it. If there's a college at Oxford that you really like the vibe of, that you think size-wise it's perfect for you, that's another thing to consider into deciding between the two places.
Nice. Yeah, I think choosing university based on the city and can you see yourself living there is a really good way to go about it, because 3 years is a long time. You don't want to be living somewhere where you don't enjoy it, even if it is Oxford or Cambridge. And with regards to going back to the course, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but for anyone who doesn't know, can you explain what the structure of the history course is and what first year, second year, third year will look like for applicants?
Sure, yeah. So I guess the best way to break it down, and there's a really useful kind of grid of this on the faculty website, is there's sort of 3 strands to the history course. So you have your historical knowledge papers, which is, I guess, what people walking into a history degree would expect a history degree to be like. It's events, places, people. You're looking in depth at a specific period of time. Then you have, I think, what's known as the craft of history side of the course, which tends to be more primary source based. And the work that goes into that is a lot more it's more of a coursework type strand to the paper. And then you have the historical thinking component, which is sort of looking at historiography, which is basically the history of history, I guess you could say, approaching how people write about history, how people think about history, different types of history, different ways of doing history. So those 3 together, you do a paper or 2 papers of each per year. So in the first year, you do 2 outline papers, which are the ones that you tend to have weekly supervisions on and weekly essays. They're somewhat broad geographically and a broad period of time as well, covering a lot of information in enough depth that you have an outline, but it's not in a massive amount of detail. And then you also will do a sources paper at the end of the year, which is an independent essay that you do based on primary source material. And then historical thinking, you have a book review, which is quite different, I think. So you will spend a couple of weeks within your college reading a piece of history, of history writing, a full book that you read from cover to cover, which is unusual. I think we tend to, for weekly essays, at least read chapters and articles. This, you really get to engage with a piece of history writing, break down what works, why it's approaching history the way that it is, what sources it's using. And you write a sort of review, I guess, of that book by the end of the year. So that's first year. Second year is quite similar structurally. So you have your 2 what's known as topic papers. So they're the kind of the in-depth historical events, places, period type things examined with exams at the end.
You have a continuation of the outline strand.
Sort of. It's structured very similarly, and it's part of the historical knowledge strand. Again, the sort of the diagram on the faculty website breaks it down a lot clearer than maybe I'm doing now. But it's potentially different papers that you did in the year before. You can continue with the same themes. You can do something entirely different. But it is a kind of in-depth historical knowledge. Your research project at the end is broadly mirrored to the sources paper. It's a piece of independent coursework based on historical sources. And then you have a historical thinking component as well. And in third year, that gets sort of repeated again, but in a more complicated way. So you do have your same sort of knowledge papers, source-based papers. You also have the opportunity to do a dissertation and a historical thinking component as well. So the papers function somewhat differently, But broadly speaking, there's 3 types to each year, 3 things that you'll be focusing on.
Yeah, that sounds really, really interesting. And I mean, I think you explained it really clearly. So compared to when you're doing history A level and when you're doing the A level and learning the course before uni, which of those like kind of 3 branches in the degree are most similar to the A level, and which of the 3 branches are like most different?
Yeah, I mean, it's thinking back a long way now.
Yeah.
From my memory, A-level history was basically the same as the historical knowledge component, so the outline topic and advanced topic papers. You focus on a period of time, you look at it sort of broadly, you go into some depth, but you're not breaking down things with immense amount of detail. Obviously, you do get more detail in the degree side of things because you're doing essays weekly. And you have a choice to kind of approach those papers in what way interests you as well. But I'd say that sort of structurally speaking, that's quite similar to history A level. I don't remember doing much work with primary sources and sort of historiography. In A level. We might have done, but if we did, it wasn't enough that it sort of sticks in my mind. So those 2 are quite different from A level, but they're kind of necessary skills in approaching history. And I think because they're so new, the faculty puts a lot of work into bridging that gap a bit. You do have lectures in the first year, which is sort of like thinking with history and breaking down how you sort of work as a historian, how do you approach sources, and that helps kind of like I said, bridge that gap between A level and degree. But there is some continuity.
Yeah. So you were saying that describe them as necessary skills. And what makes you say that?
I think, at least speaking from 3rd year, this term has been mainly focused on dissertation writing. So I have been into archives, reading primary material that's maybe not been written about a lot. And you have to know how to approach this in order to break it down effectively and construct an argument effectively as well. So I think each year builds on top of each other. So you'll start, at least in terms of sources, you'll start with your sources paper in the first year, you'll build on that with your research project. And by the time you do a special subject or a dissertation in 3rd year, you've got a kind of a strong basis and a strong confidence in your ability to read history, to write about history, and to sort of intervene in a unique way into the field. But it's sort of like looking back to A level, it does feel quite different. And it feels more like you're being a proper historian, I guess. That's how I've increasingly talked to people about it anyway, is it feels like, oh, I'm actually like, I'm doing history. I'm not just reading about it. It's an active thing now, which is quite exciting.
Rather than like an observer.
Sort of, yeah.
Nice, yeah, that sounds really cool. Can you tell us more about what your dissertation's on and how that's been?
Yeah, so my dissertation is on witchcraft. So where I'm from in East Lancashire, there were 2 witch trials in the early 17th century. The first one in 1612 is one of the most famous in English witch history. And there was a second one about 20 years ago, which is less famous.
20 years ago?
20 years later, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
No, not that recent. 20 years later, there was a second witch trial. And that's been discussed a lot less, but that's my focus. So I'm looking at the role of memory in the second witch trial, how memory of the first trial affected the proceedings of the second one, how it was then later remembered in plays, in pamphlets, in chapbooks and little like sort of stories for children. So looking at memory and the second Pendle witch trial is the sort of title of my dissertation.
Nice. That's interesting. I mean, like, mate, I guess this is kind of showing my ignorance, but if like someone like me who doesn't know that much about the history around witches and kind of presuming that witches didn't exist, what does a a witch trial mean? Like, what was happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, and it's the kind of thing that varies over time and in different places as well.
Yeah.
Even sort of regionally within England,
Okay.
there's differences. I think the main thing that you have to approach a witch trial with is you sort of have to accept that this was a reality for people.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that these women were witches,
Yeah.
but that they were believed to be a real physical presence, that the devil was believed to be present in the world, and that God as well was believed to be present in the world, is a thing that you have to sort of accept as reality that formed people's worldview.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't really dismiss that and approach it with sort of skepticism and sort of mocking these people that believed that there were witches in the world. But it's sort of a witch trial in the case that I'm looking at was really sort of a young boy trying to excuse himself for not doing his jobs. He was told to go and collect some cows by his mum, and instead he went out playing with his friends. Yeah. So he told his parents that he was abducted by witches, and that's why he didn't bring the cows home. So they can start quite ordinary and feel quite familiar in that sense as well. But they end up sort of snowballing into something quite horrific, quite unfamiliar, I guess.
So in that case, did that consequently lead to like people being like charged as being a witch? Like, what happened in that case?
The issue with this specific case is we don't have any of the trial records, so we can only sort of, with the fragments that are in the archive, piece together a kind of narrative. But it seems that about 16 to 19 women were taken, and a few men as well, were taken to Lancaster at the assizes, and they were tried. There wasn't a conclusive judgment, so they got the Bishop of Chester to come and examine the women. He wasn't sure, so then he wrote to the Privy Council in London, and they also weren't sure. So these women were then brought down to London, examined by the king, and eventually the young boy admitted that he made the whole thing up. So this is a case, and again, it's maybe somewhat unusual compared to the first witch trial in Pendle in 1612, where there were, I think, 11 executions that we know of in this trial. Yeah. No one was executed, but it is still a kind of remarkable story, because you get a group of women being brought all the way from Lancaster to London, and then that sort of fizzles out a bit. Again, it's not really too clear, unfortunately, but it's quite an interesting episode. And for me, looking at it in terms of memory, it's a great case study for that as well.
What do you mean? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of what the young boy is talking about in his evidence that he gives is a kind of warped memory of the first trial. So he would have been born maybe about 10 years after the first trial. So we can assume that he's been surrounded by stories of this, that local gossip has kind of mutated to mean that witches are believed not only to exist like they would have been, but to exist in a very similar way to how they were believed to act in 1612. So his trial is his evidence, is very indebted to the first trial. Yeah. So there's memory there. But then in the sort of the second half of my dissertation, the bit I'm sort of currently writing up now, so that's got a kind of less definitive conclusion. But there's plays written about this trial. They become a kind of stock character in culture. There's a thing called a Lancashire witch, which is sort of drawn upon. It becomes a kind of archetype for people, and that grows sort of entangled with the broader cultural image of witches as sort of old women with pointy hats, who go about putting spells on random people they don't like. So there's memory there as well, sort of an afterlife of the witches, which are then remembered. So looking at memory in sort of how the first trial was remembered and then how the second trial was subsequently remembered.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. That sounds really cool. Yeah, I'm sorry for all the questions. About
No. I love talking about it. Yeah. So it's my dissertation for a reason. It's kind of, and it's nice for me to do local history as well.
Yeah.
So it feels sort of, it's a passion that I've always had. It's an interest I've always had, and it's nice to be able to expand on that. And any opportunity I'm given to talk.
Nice.
I will.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting, especially the part about memory too. So outside of your dis, like which can you tell us a bit more about which like modules you've chosen, and then maybe like some of your favorite modules, etc.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess there's sort of two types of historians, is what I will say. There's the ones that specialize in a specific period or a place, and then the ones that take advantage of the kind of the range of papers the faculty offers. I'm more of the former. So throughout my whole time at Cambridge, I've done papers on early modern Britain. I've done other papers as well, but that's kind of been my sort of specialism, I guess, if you could put it that way, which obviously it ties into my dissertation as well. But I've also done papers from the classics faculty on ancient history, and especially on the Roman Republic. That's a paper that I'm also doing this term and quite enjoying. So there is a big, like, wide variety of papers, which I can't really kind of attest to. But my papers have sort of built on each other each year. And I don't think there's either path is the correct one or the better one. It's just whatever works for you. So in first year, I did an outline paper on early modern Britain, but then the global 18th century, which was looking at that sort of very long and sort of eventful period of time, but with a global lens. So looking beyond Europe, beyond America to South Asia or the South Pacific or Africa, and taking a more global historical approach. And that was really enjoyable because it was a lot of history that I hadn't encountered before at A-level, and especially sort of before A-level as well, when I think history at schools tends to be quite, not even sort of Eurocentric, but quite Anglocentric. It was nice to sort of step beyond that. And I guess similarly then, I've also enjoyed my classics papers. I did a paper last year on Greek and Roman inequality, and this year doing a paper on the civil wars in the late Roman Republic. So I still got a bit of variety, but I guess throughout I've built on early modern British history to the point that I'm doing my dissertation sort of within that field as well.
So is there ever a time where you might be doing like a new paper, but something that, like, because you've kind of focused on early modern Britain, do the other papers that you've done, do they become useful in like some kind of new paper that you're doing?
Definitely. I think especially with me doing ancient history, it's a strand of early modern Britain that I don't really touch on, but there's a lot of kind of, we're sort of post-Renaissance here. Classics are a big thing again, and increasingly become so into the 18th century. So there's a lot of reference to writers like Cicero, to the precedent of republics in the past. And those ideas are quite familiar to me from the classics papers that I could, if I needed to, implement them into early modern Britain.
So were you doing the more like ancient history classics papers in order to understand like the Renaissance period more?
I think you could definitely do it that way. For me, it's just that my interest kind of covers both periods. Nice. I did classics at A-level and was actually sort of torn between picking classics or history at degree level. So it's a way for me to kind of do both in a way. And I guess I should say as well that the history faculty is quite good at working interdepartmentally with other faculties. So those are papers borrowed from the classics faculty. But if your interest was more political or in archaeology, you can do papers from those faculties as well, and sort of still be doing a history degree, but maybe with a slightly different lens than other people doing a history degree. So for me, it is just that my interest is kind of split between two periods. But definitely, I mean, there has been cases where one paper has informed the other, and even just the way I've thought about it, the classics paper content-wise informs early modern papers, but also in terms of thinking about material history and different types of sources, it's also a really useful way of thinking as well.
Nice. There's that phrase, borrowing papers, which is like quite a common phrase in Cambridge. But I imagine viewers won't know what that means. Can you explain what borrowing papers means and what opportunities it provides students?
Yeah, so borrowing papers very simply is just different faculties and different courses have their own papers, and
Yeah.
you can, as a member of another faculty, take that paper as well. So it is still within the history degree. It's still a history exam at the end that you sit, but it means that you can take a classics paper that's taught by classicists and that's attended by classicists. Or I have a friend doing an archaeology paper. So she is within the archaeology department for lectures and supervisions, but it's still within her history degree. So she's just sort of swapping out what might have been a history paper for another department. And it's a slightly different way of working. It is maybe sometimes an adjustment because faculties don't often communicate with each other. You have to be that bridge. But I think if it's something that interested people, and like it does for me, sort of, it means that I can do history. I can do a sort of more classical ancient history as well alongside my other papers. It's definitely something that the faculty offers and supports. So,
So if I'm understanding correctly, so someone applies for history and they're studying history and they'll graduate with a history degree, but you can, I imagine there's a max limit, but you can like replace one of your history papers with like a paper that's from the classics faculty, or the languages department.
And they're still sort of, I guess, framed within the language of the history faculty. So my classics paper this year is a special subject, which is what every historian in third year will do. They'll have a different special subject. It just mine happens to be from the classics faculty. So it does tend to be a bit confusing on sort of like the course page where you've got it listed as it's classics terms and then it's in history terms, sort of like special subject or classics second year paper 2, whatever.
Oh, I see. So from the history student's perspective, it's their special subject.
Yeah, but so you've got people approaching it differently within each sort of audience in a lecture. You have the classicists that will approach it one way and historians that approach it another. But it's something that the faculty, I think, is keen to enable people to do these different papers because people's interests are so broad. And to work with a specialist, you might have to work in a different department.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds really cool. It's a really cool thing that Cambridge offers. I think like it's quite common with natural sciences how the course is quite broad and people can kind of dive into different things, but it's the same with the humanities, but I don't think that's advertised or publicized.
No. And it's something that I didn't know about going into it. It was just a happy sort of coincidence that in second year I can do a Greek and Roman social history paper. That's exciting.
Yeah, exactly. So have you used any of the has all of your sources been in English or any of them been in Latin or?
When sources have been in Latin, they're often translated for us by supervisors. For the classics papers, there's a lot of sort of there's a series of books which kind of gives you the Latin source on one page and the English on another. So you can see the Latin and the Greek, which I can't read unfortunately, but you can sort of have it translated for you. It's not something that you would be expected to do yourself.
Nice. So one thing that makes Cambridge quite different to most of the universities is their supervisions. Can you briefly, if anyone doesn't know, briefly explain what supervisions are and how you found them and what would the learning process be like if there weren't any supervisions?
Yeah, so a supervision is a very small, often one-on-one meeting, I guess you could say, with a supervisor who is an expert in their field. They're the people that you might have lectures from or the people that set the course. They might convene the papers. And it just gives you an opportunity typically to discuss the essay that you've submitted that week, but to discuss the content more broadly, how you found the content, how you can approach it. it's basically a discussion with an expert, which is quite a privilege to have.
Yeah.
And it is something that sets Cambridge and Oxford, they have their own equivalent. It sets them apart as universities, not only because you have that real sort of in-depth engagement with the content, but with individual supervisors, you build quite a strong relationship with them.
Yeah.
And that in itself is quite nice, that they seem to be this really daunting thing. And I know that even while I was here in sort of the first few weeks of first year, it's like terrifying because you've never done anything like that before. Certainly when it's one-on-one, but actually I think they've sort of been the best part of Cambridge, and I can't imagine doing a history degree without them. Because it's such a great opportunity to sort of air out any confusion that you have, anything that doesn't quite work for you. You get direct feedback on your essays, and often that involves a kind of running commentary of, okay, what do you mean by this? Can you explain this a bit more? Maybe don't phrase it that way. And it's great. And because they're so regular, it again, sort of like the essays themselves becomes a bit second nature. But it's something that like I said, I can't really imagine life without it. And as daunting as it seems, they actually become something, especially if you have a nice supervisor, something to look forward to.
Yeah, nice. So would you say across the 3 years, alongside the supervisions, has writing essays gotten easier, and has your essays gotten better as you've done more and more supervisions?
I'd like to think so. I think if I contrast the essays that I do at the beginning of a paper, say in week 1 versus in week 8, even when I go back to sort of revise the content at the end of the year, I can see there's a bit of a difference. And it definitely, I think the main thing is it gives you confidence. You're doing so much history that you sort of, and because you don't really have the time to sort of second guess yourself sometimes. And because supervisions are this environment where there's no judgment, there's no right or wrong answer. They just want to hear, and they genuinely are interested in how you approach the content, how you're thinking about history. It becomes this kind of thing that, it does get more easy with time, I think, and you become more confident in your ability to do it. It's not to say that it is easy. It's still a struggle, and you do tend to go more in depth the further you go through the course. So there's different challenges there, but it does become this thing that is less daunting, I would say. Yeah.
Nice. One thing that when prospective applicants are thinking about history, they're normally also thinking about other courses that are slightly adjacent to history and trying to choose between the two. So like, I know someone might be thinking about studying English or history and politics, and you were saying you were choosing between classics and history. I was wondering, do you have any it's a really broad question, but do you have any advice for prospective students when they're trying to choose their degrees, and what would they be getting if they were to be doing history, and what could they get elsewhere as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess speaking from experience, the thing that drew me to history ultimately was the variety. I knew that while I could still do ancient history papers if I did miss that, I would also be able to do periods way beyond that and places way beyond that. So there is, if you go on the faculty website, it breaks down the amount of papers. There's so much choice. And since they recently changed up the way that the tripos is structured, I think maybe sort of 5 or 6 years ago, there is so much more sort of geographical choice. So I'd say that if the variety and the kind of, if that interests and excites you, history is maybe the one to go for. Equally, if you're torn between English and history, and ultimately your interest is in the language that's used and sort of narrative and representation, you can still touch on those in a history supervision in a week or with your research project, but that's going to be the main focus of the English degree compared to history, which is going to sort of be focused more on the sort of the context, the society, the political side of things. So there definitely are overlaps, but I think what I guess I would encourage people to do is try and really dig deep and think, what actually do I enjoy about each subject? What do I want to get from it? What can I see myself hating least, having to write about each week? And for me, that was, okay, well, I think I quite like the variety and the idea that I don't have to be constrained to a specific time and place. So then I chose history. For other people, that might be that, actually, no, I do like that sort of very in-depth base of knowledge, you know, with classics especially, you have the languages as well. So it depends. I'd say think about what you want, see on the faculty websites what papers they offer, almost try and think ahead and think what papers would I take next year? Would I be enjoying that? Would I regret not having done the other thing? But there are overlaps. You know, if you do an English degree, you can do quite a lot of history within that. And similarly, if you do a history degree, my research project last year was on life writers in the 17th century. So it kind of became a literary analysis. So it, in a way, probably didn't feel too different to an English degree. So yeah, I would say focus on what you want to get from it, what you actually enjoy about it, and then that will probably inform a decision.
Do you have any like advice, of can you explain like the differences between what the history course would look like compared to like history and politics?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm not too familiar with the exact structure of history and politics, but I will say that from talking to people who do that paper or that do history and languages, your time is more split between the two departments. So you do tend to do, for politics, I guess you probably do more modern political history, more political theory. Again, there's papers that you can borrow from that sort of core structure if you were doing history. And obviously with languages, you have the kind of the language learning and cultural engagement and the year abroad built into that. I think I've heard that it can be a bit of a struggle balancing the two sides of the course. Again, it maybe becomes a thing you have to think of, how organized am I? How happy would I be to sort of split my mind in two between these two subjects, and maybe have to focus on one at the expense of another at points in term. But the people that do those papers really love them, and sort of have not regretted their decision to pick them. So again, it all comes down to, what do you want? Do you want to have a kind of language component and a year abroad, but still do history? I would encourage you to maybe look at the history and languages. Or if you want to engage with current politics and sort of political theory and breaking down maybe like the philosophy of thought, that might be more of a history and politics type thing. Although again, there's overlaps, so you can still do both within a history degree.
Yeah, because in the even in the straight history course, there is am I right in thinking there's the intellectual history?
Yes, there is. And they're quite popular papers. They're not papers that I've done, but you can do the history of political thought. For historical thinking, you can do an intellectual history question if that interested you. So it's this constant thing of, you never have to box yourself. Even if you make the choice for pure history, that doesn't mean that you can't engage with modern politics. There's an American paper that goes up to 2016. Or if you do the history and languages paper, you might engage with a Latin American paper that would require you to maybe learn a little bit of Spanish on the side. If that was something you were interested in, it would give you the opportunity to anyway.
Nice.
So yeah, it's never as kind of rigid as it seems on a course outline website, but it is the kind of thing that if you had a very split interest in languages and history, you might find that that would be better reflected in the split degree of the two.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's really useful advice. And it paints a really vivid picture of the different opportunities that there are for humanities students at Cambridge. And last thing that we have is, I think a lot of people have preconceptions about Cambridge, that they think that if they were to go to Cambridge, all of their time will be spent on studying. I was wondering, like, would you say, is that the case? And like, what, and if not, like, what things have you been up to outside of studying?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing to say at the start is that Cambridge it is intense. There is a lot of work, but it's also not a constant stream of work. And I think you would actually be hurting yourself if you did just work all the time and not have time away from it. So for me, I mean, it was more so a second year thing. I was involved in the College History Society. I was involved in the university's film society, and we actually made a short film in the first term of second year, which was really fun, and a really sort of great way to step back from work but still feel productive. So there's so many opportunities. I mean, sports is not really my thing, but so many different types of sports that you can do. And obviously you have your sort of standard university social things. You'll do things with your friends. I love going to the cinema. I have a camera, and I love sort of taking photos around Cambridge, and that's a nice break from work as well. So it's definitely the kind of thing that not only do you have the time to step back, but you're sort of encouraged to by supervisors. Because I think if you just constantly lock in and don't step back from work, it can be a detriment to yourself. So there's definitely time to do a lot, and Cambridge offers a lot. There's a lot of societies, there's a lot of activities, and it's not all. It's something that I wish I knew going into it. It's not all work, and you will have a break, and you'll have the time to do things away from that.
Nice. Yeah, I think photography was also my pastime of mine during uni, so it's I can really relate to that. Can you tell us more about what the film society was like, and what was the process of making the short film like as well?
It was really fun. So I had a friend who did it in first year, and she was like, if I do it again in second year, will you do it with me? I was like, sure, why not? So we got together there's a group of 5 of us that we got assigned, and we're given a Super 8 camera, which is sort of a film camera that doesn't pick up sound. And we're tasked, basically, we have sort of 5 or 6 weeks to write a script, organize actors, costumes, locations, and to make a sort of, I think it ended up being like a 3 to 5 minute short film. And it was really fun. So I was, I guess, sort of the writer of it. There wasn't any dialogue because there was no sound, but it ended up being this kind of sort of comedic, almost kind of like dance through Cambridge was what it became. And some of them are really good. They were all so different. You had ones that were more horror focused, ones that were more comedy. But it was fun at the end of term we had like a movie screening night where we all had the premiere of our short film, and we got to see other people's. And because they're on film, they look quite cool as well. Cambridge is sort of photogenic anyway, but it looks really great on film. And so it was a nice break from work, like I said, in that first term, but it was also a nice way to meet other people, to get involved in kind of script writing more. It's something that I'd kind of always been interested in, but never had the opportunity to do it, or the reason to do it. And it's something that I'm glad I did. I wish I could have done it again this term, but it's something that if anyone's interested in film, coming into Cambridge, definitely look out for that in the first year, because it's a great opportunity.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds really cool. Sounds like a lot of fun. Shooting around Cambridge and film, it sounds like really cool. That's everything that we have. Thank you, Josh, so much. Such an interesting podcast on history, and thank you, the viewers, for watching. We're hoping to cover the remaining courses that we haven't done podcasts on that Cambridge offers, so we're hoping to do those over the next few weeks. Let us know in the comments if there's any other podcasts you'd like us to do, and we'll see you guys next time. Nice. Oh, how was that?
That was okay. I think so.
You did really well.
Thank you. Good.